Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
4, Romeo, 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec, Oscar,
I dreamt a dream, what can it mean? And that I was a maiden queen, guarded by an angel mild, witless woe was ne'er beguiled. And I wept both night and day, and he wiped my tears away. And I wept both day and night, and hid from him my heart's delight. So he took his wings and fled. Then the morn blushed rosy red. I dried my tears and armed my fears with 10,000 shields and spears. Soon my angel came again. I was armed, he came in vain, for the time of youth had fled, and gray hairs were on my head. That is The Angel by William Blake. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. This is the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and also discuss a variety of occult, esoteric, and adjacent topics, exploring the intersections of magic, art, science, philosophy, technology, and so much more through the lens of chaos magic. This is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice right now, that means that this show, and magic for that matter, are for you if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in the world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life can be one of them. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. People can, will, and should disagree sometimes with the things that I or my guests say on this show. How we ever learn anything if we were all in agreement on all things after all anyway. And like those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I can and often do revise my opinions or thoughts about things based on new evidence. Alright, very stoked to present today's episode to y'all. I spoke with friend of the show, Cliff from Enochian today earlier in the year about his recent experiments and investigations into the Enochian realms. We'll get into the Enochian Mandalas he's creating and how they might or might not be related to Western Kabbalah, and the idea of finding ways of using training in Enochian to find inroads to other types of work in other systems. We get into hypnosis and much more. Cliff and I are both pretty fascinated by numbers, so we talk a little bit about the primes, and I ask Cliff how he feels about the idea that numbers might have a personality in a sort of animistic way. Cliff also shares about his updated Enochian zodiacal tables and some encounters with the phenomenon he's had since starting his new magical project. It's really fun and interesting stuff. Before we get into it here, let me remind you that if you like the show or the other work I've been getting into, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me, and there are no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is an option for those who wish to show their one-time support with a one-time donation. Thank you so much to everybody who is doing all of this. Your support makes the show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it, thereby justifying to myself the pretty wild amount of time I spend. I really appreciate the opportunity to be making this beast, and having the resources necessary to reach y'all today is a huge factor in that, so thank you so much to the support which is making that possible. Although I'm a pretty introverted person and I don't use social media very much due to this, I'm not there checking on things every day or anything like that, but it certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from you all or anything like that. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing listeners, collaborators, cohorts, co-conspirators, etc. I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram at luxoccultpod. Alright, so Cliff has been doing magic for around 25 years and specializes in Enochian, which he's been focused on for about the last 5. His websites are Enochian Today for Enochian correspondence, which people can reach out to him there, and he usually gets back in about a day, he notes. And for astrological consultations, Cliff can be reached at yourlightbridge.com. I've actually had an astrological consultation with Cliff, which I found to be pretty interesting and helpful. especially in building out the zodiacal path working system that I came up with to get deeper into some work I was doing with the Picatrix. You can hear Cliff and I talk about Enochian magic and his experiments with it in episodes 20 and 36 of this show as well, if you like what you hear today. All right, well, fuck yeah, I'll be back during a break to share some seasonal cheer from the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society's Solstice Songs album, and we'll do listener mail and shoutouts and updates about the Green Mushroom Project and Void House, our newest experiment in creating a consent-forward space to do magical work both in person and online. But now, let's get into it. Here's my latest chat with Cliff from Enochian Today. All right, well, my guest once again is Cliff from Enochian Today. Cliff, how's it going?
Hey, not too bad. How about you?
Going well, going well. Well, thanks so much for returning. I'm really stoked to hear an update about what's been going on and what you have to share with us. I know there's a lot of new things.
Oh man, anything and everything, right? Yeah, so I guess the main thing is that I started another 49-day operation, and that is currently on hold until September. I had to pause it about halfway through for a couple of reasons, and it was kind of like, at first I was kind of like, well, why is it only on hold until September? Why isn't it only on hold until like maybe June or something like that? And it turned out there were a couple things. One is that I got sick, and then now just recently a family member died. And so it was like, oh, okay, like the angels like kind of knew that a bunch of stuff was going to come up, and they were just like, nope, this is put on pause for like about 4 months. So the ritual is kind of a parallel to what I did earlier, which was sort of my own version of Jebafal, which is this angelic ritual going back to like John Dee and Edward Kelly. They were supposed to do a ritual that sort of like purified themselves and helped them basically unlock some of the mysteries of this big table that they had to work with. That was this big, huge transmission that we don't need to entirely get into, but suffice it to say it was a lot of work for them to make it.
We did just discuss it a little bit in our last conversation, didn't we? So people can go back and listen to that as a reference.
Sure, absolutely. So this version is that I'm doing right now is kind of a parallel to that, and it's just basically working at a more subtle level. So the one main book that they were working with was called Liber Loga, and it's this 49 front and back leaf, so 96 pages in all book. But then there was another 49-page book, or 48-leaf book, I should say, that is called the Book of Silvered Leaves. So I had not heard about that. And then once I did hear about it, I said, I need to find information about this. So that was a whole extra, ritual that I did in between. And now this current 49-day ritual that I'm doing is sort of linking both of those together. So the main idea is to just sort of get into like some, what I can only describe, and, magicians who get familiar with this, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going into this subtle area, and then I'm going into an even more subtle area. So that's kind of where I am, where it's like, okay, what is going on with this? Why am I doing this? And then the answer to that is, oh, I'm supposed to create this technology, basically, or spiritual linkage that's going to make it easy to hinge, so to speak, this plane of Enochian with all of these other spiritual systems. So I'm getting certain things like working with Buddhism, get the Buddhist entities coming in at this other plane at a slight angle from the Enochian plane, and there's going to be a slight hinge there. Okay, that's great. Well, what about this other thing? What about these ancient Greek beings we might have heard of called the Gorgons, of which Medusa was one? Let's find another hinge there.
Worked a bit with Medusa recently. Very interesting. Okay.
Exactly. And so what I'm finding is that, so the entire purpose of this technology and this ritual that I've been working is to make these systems that are out there and that exist, which also includes like Egyptian deities, stuff like that already seem to have like a baseline interoperability, and trying to get them to work and to flow and to be able to move together. So it's kind of hard to describe on audio, but if you think of those like plastic toys that if you collapse it down, it looks like just a very stellated figure like a 3-year-old has, and then when you open it up, it's like this big spherical thing. I don't know what that's called exactly,
Yeah,
but
I think they were called
yeah,
like buckyballs or something like
Bucky,
that.
but yeah, like a buckyball, exactly, very similar to that. So the idea is that what this working is going to do is going to make it easy, not necessarily say, hey, you need to come in and do Enochian if you're from this, or if you're doing Enochian, hey, you need to go out and do Buddhism instead, but instead make it easier for somebody to go from one thing into another. So the whole idea is basically what I've discovered and just sort of putting into words for the first time here is that it's kind of like the chaos magician's dream, right? To be able to, if I want to, go from Enochian into Buddhism with very little learning curve, so to speak. I mean, not an actual learning curve. Obviously, you still need to learn and do the research, but there's less of a spiritual barrier or less of a change to the energetic flow that you'll need to do in order to get from one thing into another. So it's pretty cool. Now, is that kind of fraught? I mean, especially considering chaos magicians do tend to work with, Eris, who likes to throw her a little bit of discord into things, but it can be helpful. So you don't have to make a switch and to hinge from one thing into another, but you can if you want to. So I'm making it available to folks.
So I'm curious, are you kind of thinking about this as being related to syncretism, or is this something completely different than that?
Yeah, it's a form of syncretism that is working really kind of at the energy body or subtle body level. And that's kind of a very broad term, but people who are familiar with chakras should be sort of familiar with the idea of, okay, there's this extra layer of subtle body in addition to the physical body. Now, when you get working with it for a while, you can sort of notice yourself flowing from one feeling into the other. But what I've noticed when I was originally working with this big Enochian book of Liber Loga is I would, just very briefly, it's basically this 49 by 49 table that you then have to fill in all of the squares on a given page, let's say, or maybe every other square with a letter, or in one with one exception where you put in numbers and another exception, but that's okay. We don't need to get all into that. But what I found is that as I was copying the letters, transliterating it from English letters into Enochian letters, and all of that, what I found is that it was like opening up a teeny tiny lock every time I did that, and basically opening up more and more subtle bodies within me, like not just the big 7 major chakras, like the heart chakra or the root chakra or the crown, but instead, and if you get into like more of the Vedic systems, there's like way more than just those 7, right? Those are these 7 big ones that we're all familiar with. There's way more. And what I found is that doing that ritual opened up a whole lot more of those within me. Doing the Book of Silvered Leaves also did something similar when I was working with it. So now basically what's going to happen is this is feeling a lot like this large, like I'll go back to that idea of a plane. Like if you're coming into it with, relatively well-functioning energy body system, then you'll be able to take your consciousness there and be able to quickly move from, let's say, very fully operant in maybe, let's say, a Buddhist tradition, and then be able to make a pivot relatively seamlessly into Enochian work. So it'll work with the energy body that you have, and it'll be pretty interoperable when you're flowing from, let's say, one system into another.
Very cool. All right. Well, yeah, that does sound very interesting, and I'm curious to explore what that might be like. Very cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of the whole idea. And so, well, what does this mean in real life? Well, or mundane life, let's put it that way, because the magical life is very real, as we know. So one of the things that I'm working on that is also at a bit of a pause right now is that I've been working on this series of additional tables that you're supposed to be just able to use like a mandala in Buddhism, that you can just experience almost like as a magic eye. Those of us who came up in the 90s, we remember those things where you're just supposed to stare and gaze, but it's a meditation focus, right? Mm-hmm. So that will be the similar thing that you would do with this table. In a lot of ways, you could argue that Liber Loga is very much like this. Except what happens is you're going from, with this, what I'm going to call an Enochian mandala, you're going from something relatively small that starts with the capitalized letters in the Watchtower tablet system, which is, I think, a total of 100 capitalized letters, maybe a little bit less. But you're going from something relatively small, 10 by 10, into something a little bit larger and a little bit larger and a little bit larger. And then it's sort of like your consciousness can sort of swim in this very, very large, it's going to be up to like 109 by 109. And it's all kind of going on in Excel, and it's not done yet at all, but it's going to be very, very large, very trippy. And it's funny, you know, when you're working with these tables, you can start seeing little things. And when Edward Kelly was getting that transmission from the book Liber Loga, what he was discovering, at one point, he actually started reading aloud from it accidentally, just to try to, like, you know, say, okay, what is this word? And then he says it. And then up from that pops this gnome that comes and starts attacking him, or a group of gnomes, because they're all angry that he summoned them. And he's like, I wasn't trying to do that, blah, blah, blah. So John Dee has to point his magic wand and banish them and all of that. But the point is that, right, just by saying it and being in that space where you're reading off of that work, that very intense magical seal, basically, which is kind of what the tables are, you're able to get something and get somewhere. Well, the whole idea of this is that no matter where you are, you can get somewhere new from it. And every time you go to a new table, it's like another dimension opens up and a new layer of subtlety becomes available to you. So that's the whole idea with this Enochian mandala.
Okay, very cool. I'm trying to see how this might be able, like, for listeners, how would you contextualize in terms of the Western esotericist version of Kabbalah? Like, where would we sort of draw parallels, just so for people to kind of like wrap their heads around what you're talking about?
Sure. Well, the trouble is that the West has basically imported a lot of ideas about the subtle body system. But what I would say is that there has been some attempts with ideas like the middle pillar ritual is probably the best one to go with as far as, quote unquote, the West's version of energy body work. So the whole idea there, if you've ever done the middle pillar ritual, is that your feet are basically you're projecting this idea of your feet as being most closely related to the physical realm. So we call that Malkut. And that maybe when you get to the heart center of your body, we picture that as going up the tree of life, and suddenly you're in Tiferet, which is the dead center of the tree of life. And then at the very top of the tree would be like somewhere either at your crown or maybe slightly above the crown. We would call that Keter, which is the Hebrew for crown, and that would be the very top of the tree of life. But potentially there's also even more subtle areas like the realm of Adam Kadmon. We can set that aside for now. But
the dark heart of Doth.
I mean, and that's sort of, at the nape of the neck, depending on which version you have. I learned mine from Donald Michael Craig originally, and the late Donald Michael Craig with his book Modern Magic, which is still a very decent introduction to magic in my view. But so that's what we have, right? So when when I say we, I mean Westerners, writ large. So when you're doing something like that, you're sort of visualizing these as like spheres, right? Mm-hmm. And we're trying to imagine that, we can imagine light flowing through, and then that light itself is actually just our mental idea of energy. And by so imagining that, we actually are causing the subtle bodies to flow energy through, and maybe as they flow through, sort of unlock these little areas of resistance and stuff like that. So what this would be is, so you could imagine, and there are centers, by the way, for each one of the seven, I think each one of the seven major chakras, or maybe six, but the main, five or six of them in the middle pillar ritual, and then, other spots are more associated with the shoulders, but the middle pillar is the one that you focus on because that's the main middle pillar ritual. So the whole idea there kind of goes with what Crowley, I believe, wrote about how it's lifting a man, because he used the English, old English versions of that, in a vertical line. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about getting our consciousness not just at this mundane physical realm, but lifting up our consciousness through these other chakras, and through that middle pillar in particular, even though the other chakras also exist. Now, that's basically like the alphabet, a 10-letter alphabet that we can think of, and you're only using 5 of those letters when you're doing that ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Contrast this to the Eastern system, where there may very well be thousands of these, right? And we have these ideas of acupuncture, acupressure, where you are not just looking at one channel, but an entire massive network of channels. Mm-hmm. Enochian is supposed to get, so from something like that to the thousands into maybe more of the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of places that you could go. And, the places you will go, right? To kind of quote Dr. Seuss, you can go a whole bunch of different places. And that's the whole idea behind Enochian, in my view, or this Enochian ritual is not supposed to keep you, focused in any one thing, but give you the options here to integrate way more and to go explore whatever floats your boat, whatever your fancy is, but to make it a lot more things available to you, kind of no matter where you're coming from. So whether you're a beginner and you're using like some of the very simple mandalas that I have, it's all being recorded in Excel, so eventually it'll all get published and all of that. Somehow, I don't know how yet, but so
will help you.
Right, but you can imagine like a little 10 by 10 square, and we've seen like kind of these numerical magic squares, like a Mars square is 5 by 5. Mm-hmm. You can imagine like a 10 by 10. Okay, that's a decent enough meditation focus. I don't need to go that far. So if you're just a beginner, start with that. Look at that, see what's interesting, see kind of what pops out at you. I wouldn't tell you if you're a basic beginner, do that. But if you've done maybe an LBRP or a middle pillar ritual on top of that, yeah, maybe start with that. Start seeing what you get. See how your consciousness reacts to it. And then maybe as you get more advanced or you've exposed yourself to more and more systems, you'll be able to go from that to some of the larger and larger tables in that mandala format. So yeah, just basically a really overly massively complex thing, but it's sort of, if you're going to have something that's intended to be interoperable with pretty much anything, then yeah, you kind of need to have something get more and more complicated and larger, and eventually sort of speaking of Kabbalah, get to that idea where your brain kind of like short circuits because everything is like so vast and you can't actually comprehend the infinite. And that also is a step in the process, and just realizing, oh, we're all part of like this massive consciousness, and settling your awareness and your heart within that. It's humbling, and at the same time, it puts everything in perspective.
Yeah, I love that. That's very cool. And from a sort of more like even mundane perspective, like, if we talk about hypnosis and stuff, one of the pathways to like induction is sort of being overwhelmed by information, and your brain just sort of goes like, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the conscious mind can't do anything, and so the subconscious mind can sort of come in and take over, or at least the conscious mind is paralyzed through analysis paralysis, and then you can start suggesting stuff to the unconscious mind.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
So I'm so curious to hear about how this ties in with prime numbers. That was something that you had mentioned to me in one of our conversations. I think this was a couple months ago, and I think we're both kind of like fascinated by numbers. I know a lot of listeners are as well. So I'm curious to hear how that ties in with this.
Yeah. So numbers are kind of interesting in if you think about it, like, we get like prime numbers are almost like this massive background from which all of these other everyday numbers like 100 or 25 or 36, where it's like all of the foreground is almost everything in terms of like compound numbers, and only like this very small number of like 3, 7, 11, when you realize how vanishingly small the number of prime numbers is, it makes you realize, oh, okay, what's going on with that. And I think that the angels that, as far as I've dealt with them in working in this mandala, have given me, they're very interested in the number 7, and 7 kind of has a whole lot of mystical meanings to it. It's the 7th day in the Bible. God made it holy. And there are 7 classical planets in astrology, stuff like that. But what I found is that they will sometimes give me like this mind-bogglingly large prime number out of the blue, or they'll give me a very large, what's the word yeah, the number is escaping, the idea is escaping me. Anyway, a 7 to the nth power, basically, a very large version of that. And I'm
Exponent or
not,
whatever.
yeah, exponent. That's it. And I'm just like, not even like, I am not one of these people who's like, I'm good at math, but I am not what's known as a human calculator, where you ask me the seventh
Me
root of,
neither.
something to the,
I'm
of
too
like,
dyslexic for all that.
yeah, of like an 11-digit number. I can't do that. That's not in my wheelhouse. And what I found some interesting patterns with respect to Enochian, where there are these very large numbers of servient angels in the calls. And it turns out that if you, servient numbers to these zodiacal king angels, basically. And there are also these separate large numbers in the Enochian calls, which you read aloud in order to work with Enochian. And what I found, strangely, is that that there are very unique ways in which the numbers of servient angels, like we're talking, 1,000 plus to like, on the order of maybe like in the tens of thousands, will add up to these other numbers that are in the calls. And there's no way like you could actually like do that unless you were a human calculator and have everything like come out very neatly, which it does. But regardless, what I found when I'm kind of really in the mix right now, I'm not, like I said, I'm on a little bit of a break, but what I found is that when I'm really deep into this Enochian energy, more and more of these very large prime numbers are being transmitted to me. And I'm not the only person who's had like mathematics be shown to them. I think his name is Ramanujan, who,
A
he
huge
was,
fan of this guy. Yeah, absolutely.
yes, he was very, very getting, very large mathematical concepts and interesting numbers from the family deity, which was a version of Lakshmi, I believe.
Yeah, it was
So,
like this goddess that would appear in his dreams and
yes,
show him all this math stuff. And like there's like whole schools of mathematics that he kind of created. It's very impressive stuff. So yeah,
yeah,
very cool.
yeah. And I'm not having anything on that order, but
Or
I'm
not yet.
or I'm not claiming to be anything like that, because I'm really not. Math is an interest of mine, but that's not my background or specialty by any means. But it is interesting to me and sort of telling. Like I know enough to be able to appreciate, hey, this is like a very large, 7 exponent or exponent of 7 times very, very large prime numbers that are like being combined in this way, that maybe the digits add up to 7 or something like that. And I wouldn't have known that in advance. And like I say, I can't know that in advance because I don't have the time to do that given my lifestyle, but also I just don't have the long attention span that a real mathematician would have in order to be able to do that. I kind of got to move on and just kind of like live my life. I don't dwell in those spaces the way somebody who's a really good mathematician could do. But I do appreciate it when I start investigating the thing that's given to me and I realize, oh, it's got this property or it's got that property. And this makes it like pretty unique. So I think as more and more of these larger tables in the mandalas sort of like come out, I'll leave it to future people to just out of curiosity, pull apart individual numbers and sort of see some of the same things that I do. If it winds up being that interesting to folks. If it's not, oh well, I tried.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating and also very, this is a very kind of ambitious undertaking. It sounds really cool. Has there ever been anything that's emerged along the lines of thinking about numbers in a sort of animistic way in terms of like, do you think they have a sort of character in which they each are a sort of servant of ours or something like that? This is something I consider sometimes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I suppose they would have to be, wouldn't they? Yeah, I kind of have this view that everything basically has a consciousness. So I suppose even these very fundamental things, such as numbers, they also have to kind of be alive in their own way too, don't they? We hear songs like 3, it's a magic number, but so they combined that idea in Christianity with also this 7 idea, where 7 is holy. So you kind of have like this divine number 3 combined with 7 to make it holy, and then you get 10 Sephirot on the tree of life, right?
Yeah, and 10's a great number. It's like 1 and it's got 0 in it. It's got
yeah.
Great. So
yeah, definitely. And we use 10, even though a lot of nature seems to use binary. but binary is also a 1-0 number, so I think there's something to be said for that. So that's an interesting idea, and not one that I've explored as much, but I do like that idea a lot. Even like the underlying rules of reality, what I found when I start exploring that is that the rules themselves are kind of alive, and they can be worked with and persuaded maybe sometimes to allow themselves to be bent, or have an exception written into them that they may not be aware of.
Yeah, I love that phrasing of it. That's a very cool way of looking at it.
3, Romeo, 2, 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo, 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec.
Greetings, it is I, Luxa from the future. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We have a lot more fun stuff to get into here, including hearing about Cliff's encounters with the phenomenon, his updated zodiacal tables, and more. After the interview, we'll do listener mail and shoutouts. But for now, let me give you a quick update about what we have going on with the Green Mushroom Project and Void House. So Green Mushroom Project is an ongoing group magical working based on the biological metaphor of the ecological relationship that some fungi share with some plants. In a nutshell, if we, the magical practitioners of Green Mushroom Project, are like a forest of trees, the Green Mushroom current connects us and strengthens us in unseen ways, much like the mycological hyphae would. In addition to the mycelial web which connects us, there are the mushroom spores, which are little packets of the current's energy, which can be applied to situations as needed by any participant. You can think about them as being little micro-servitors if you want to. And if you're unfamiliar with the word servitor, I suggest that you check out the first episode of this podcast called Explaining Magic to My Brother. There's some other chaos magic adjacent stuff too earlier on here. Green Mushroom Project's newest experiment, Void House, is about investigating the healing and alchemical properties of consent, providing consent education to magically inclined people, and organizing consent-forward magical spaces for doing group work, both in person and online. There's lots of fun and free activities going on the Green Machine Discord server, which is the home of the Green Mushroom Hypho Sigil Project and Void House. You can join us for our weekly Fungal Friday chats about a variety of magical topics, book clubs, as well as special events and ceremonies. Shout out to everybody who attended our Myco ceremony for healing, strength, and solidarity, as well as our Yule gift ceremony. We're announcing a call for submissions for our third offering of collected work. Look around and find out. Part 3 is going to be sorceress recipes for resistance, resilience, and more from the Green Mushroom Project. The deadline to submit for that is February 14th, and you can find details in the show notes. As always, much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project, regardless of what that looks like for you in your practice. It's been such an honor and such a privilege to be sharing this journey with you all. The idea of consent being a central guiding philosophical principle to doing group magical work, as well as providing education about the nuances of consent to magically inclined people, is something that I and others are really stoked about and into, and I feel incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to be working on this little project in a world that wants to push us around and cause us to conform to the wishes of others, maintaining healthy boundaries and communicating about your needs, and the rest of what goes into a consent practice is a genuine form of resistance. Shout out to the Consent Academy for their awesome work that they're doing, and thank you so much to everybody who has been assisting with our efforts and who has been showing so much enthusiasm for this way of doing things. Gratitude. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod or on Blue Sky at luxestrada to get a link to the Discord server. Thanks so much to everybody who is making this show possible by giving on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. And thank you so much to you for listening. All right, moving back into my chat with Cliff, which I'm looking back on it. It's somewhat of a holiday tradition by now. There's another one where he and I talked for the solstice, so check out episode 36 after this one if you're into it. And we'll go ahead and celebrate this season with a song from the H.P. Lovecraft's Historical Society's Winter Solstice album. And I will put a link to that in the show notes in case you're interested in getting yourself a copy of that. All right, cheers. So let's get a little bit weird here. You talked about
Sure.
when we spoke before a little bit about the intersection between Enochian magic and some of what we see with the unidentified fly aerial phenomenon or whatever we're calling them this week.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can definitely say that as I've gotten more into Enochian, the more I've been having experiences, which is not to say I've had a bunch, but I've had at least I think I've had at least two or three of them. One of them was I was out for a jog, and it was actually my first sighting was a daytime sighting, which is very rare for folks in general. I'm not saying I'm special, but I'm saying like so I look up and I see like it might as well have been like a laser pointer, except it was like this bright green. And it sort of went all over and then it sort of dipped below the horizon. And I tried to like jog towards the horizon and I couldn't see it afterwards. So that was wild. And it's just sort of been interesting. I don't know if you've heard of Chris Bledsoe, but I was getting interested in his story on account of his son Ryan and his podcast, Bledsoe Said So. And full disclosure, I've been a guest on there. But it was interesting. He wrote this book called UFO of God. And basically, it's this whole idea that the light beings in the sky, maybe we ought to go turn back the clock a little bit in terms of our phraseology. And instead of calling them aliens, maybe we ought to go back to calling them angels or angelic beings or whatever, what have you.
Yeah, this is a
And
kind of a common outlook that a lot of people
yes,
that are into the phenomenon have talked about. Okay, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I've seen, I've had a couple more experiences. One I'm like less 100% on, but another one was I was having a dream about my late grandfather, and I woke up like very emotional, and I just like got up and I just darted out back, and I looked up in the sky, and then all of a sudden I see a light, and he goes up, up, and then off to the side, and then that was it. But it was like, okay, that was like real confirmation to me that okay, there's like this emotional side when it comes to both like life, but also like magic and the phenomenon. But also combining that with getting very heavy into this, this what we can loosely call a technology, but it's more than just a technology in the same way that being on your phone with somebody that you really care about is like a technology. But yes, but it's important to me because of the emotions it's stirring up.
Yeah, there's this great show called *Halt and Catch Fire*. It's about technology, and there's this line in the show where it's like it's not the thing, it's the thing that gets you to the thing. I just love
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It's a bridge.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what I found is that this stirring up of emotion, this raw emotion at the heart, combined with working with this very kind of mind bending work in terms of Enochian. It's very complicated. I've done my best to like make it easier for folks, like lower that barrier to entry a little bit, but it is still a complicated system. But at the same time, people keep coming back to it because it works pretty well. And so what I found is that getting into it and really trying to both, make it easier for folks to use, trying to, fill in whatever gaps I see in the system, but also expand it out so that it can be worked, or like you say, syncretized or made interoperable. What I found is that all of a sudden, like a lot more of these weird phenomena are like appearing to me coincidental with that. Now, what's going on with that? I don't know. I'm not sure, but they are certainly timing things in my life a certain way so that, for example, oh, you got to stop this ritual. Well, why? Oh, well, they're not going to tell me why, but then it turns out I come down with shingles like a week later. And well, why is it still going? Oh, now a relative has died. And oh, it's just like, oh, I don't know how to explain this, but they told me that everything will be, ready to go in about a month or so. And they're also having me, look at the Greek magical papyri. I don't know why entirely,
Okay.
but it's interesting that how it seems to subtly incorporate other stuff and really seems to be expanding a lot of expanding into other areas. So,
Very cool. Very cool.
mhm.
So you had mentioned also an updated zodiacal table.
Yeah. So the one of the things that is talked about a lot is like the aethers when it comes to Enochian, right? So this, depending on which way you slice it, either like these concentric circles that arise above the earth and go all the way up into like this very broad heaven. And there are governors over those. And for a long time, it seemed like, well, the parts of the earth, depending on which author you read, maybe the name of the part of the earth is the governor. But it turns out actually there are only 12 governors that are repeated at various points in the aethers and in the parts of the earth themselves. Sort of like each aether has different parts of the earth associated with it. There's this whole system of political magic. But those zodiacal governors, each of them, much like the heptarchy part of Enochian, each of those governors has a 7-letter name, with one exception. And so that made my ears perk up a little bit, because I know that using the 7-letter Enochian princes and kings, there are 7 of each of those. So if you do the math on those and you take off like the first letter of that, it turns out you get the same number of letters if you take these zodiacal kings. So you have 12 kings, 7 letters each. You have 84 letters, which is just the same number of letters that you have around the original Holy Table of Practice. And it turns out that that original Holy Table of Practice used by John Dee and Edward Kelly, it was only supposed to be used for a short time. And I said, what? When I discovered this. And instead, what I realized is, you could pattern the names of these zodiacal kings in the same way that the heptarchical kings and princes are patterned. And then all of a sudden you have another table. Now, a little bit of extra pulling and asking the angels for assistance and stuff like that. Pulling, which is to say from the watchtowers once again. I got another list of things that to add to the table and so on and so forth. But what I found is that it seems to add just like another layer of oomph, for lack of a better term. So what I'll do is whenever I'm working with Enochian, I'll work both with, I'll charge up, so to speak, the original heptarchical table. And then also I made this little printout version, it's 2 feet by 2 feet, but it's all relative. The
Tiny
original,
little table with hundreds
right,
of entries,
Right, exactly. But I'll charge that one up as well. And what I found is it seems to, I don't know that it's necessarily much more effective, but it's adding like this layer of subtlety. And Enochian is interesting for me anyway. It keeps on having another way to draw you in a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. At the same time, I got to live my life and deal with, with everything else. But I think a balance can be struck. It's funny when I look at my own chart astrologically, there's this aspect that can be found, there are squares and oppositions and stuff like that. There's an aspect known as a septile or a triseptile or a biseptile, which is a 7th, obviously. So Enochian, again, 7. But the interpretation is often that it's like the infinite trying to get in, because it's one of the first numbers when you're going through these different aspects. It's the first number that doesn't divide evenly. You get opposition 180 square, you get 90 degrees. Septiles, you can't do that. So it's like the infinite is trying to get in. And I liken it to trying to get, 10 pounds of flour in a 5-pound bag, and you're trying to like smush it in, and you can't do that, right? But that's what I get when I analyze my own natal chart, is like the infinite is trying to come in. And how is that happening? Well, here's a guy now who's suddenly interested in this hyper complex angelic system. And so he's spending a lot of his life trying to balance his mundane life with Enochian. So, I'll never get the balance completely right, but it's interesting.
That makes sense. And actually, yeah, that tracks. I was going to ask, I don't really run in a lot of like Enochian circles. I don't have a whole lot of conversations about Enochian with people other than you. So I'm curious, like, how has this work been received? I know you had been doing some things which would have been considered, I think, pretty non-traditional with Enochian. And I'm just curious about how that's been kind of received by the community.
Yeah, I am, for several reasons, I'm no longer on Facebook.
Me
But
neither.
yeah, right. It's almost nice, to have it. You really have to curate your own social media experience nowadays. That's what I've discovered is like, yeah, we all had the place to go, but now, okay, how do I want to be present online? And I
It's just
found
too much for me. Yeah.
it is too much. Yeah. So I'll go on Threads and I'll go on Discord, and that's kind of about it. But when I was on Discord, or on Facebook, I should say, I was interested in some of the Facebook groups, and there were like two of them that I found that were like had a lot of members. And one was very much, we need to be very close and adhere to the John D. Purist style, blah, 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 blah. And there's a very strong argument for that. I am not denying that at all. And then there was this other one that says Enochian can, do a whole bunch of different things, and it's like blah 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, but and then I'm reminded of the Carl Sagan phrase, open-minded but not so open, your brains fall out, right?
Sure.
And there was a lot of kind of more on that end, and I realized like I'm probably kind of okay in between, but I also just realized like I kind of realized I had to explore Enochian a lot by myself. And it's not so much that I'm not a good team player. I'm a very good team player, and let me just find you all the teams that I've been a part of, and
You
they will
can prove
vouch
it.
for me. They will vouch for me, I swear. But what I realized when it came to this is that I think everybody has their own thing that they're interested in when it comes to Enochian. And so if you're part of like a magical order, like obviously the OTO would be a big one, then that's a thing where they have their own approach. They have a structure that makes sense, and they're leading people through an initiatory path. Me, I've always tended to be enough of a free thinker that it's not really going to help me out to have that, because I'm just going to kind of skip ahead, and I already kind of know some of this stuff, and I know myself well enough to know where I need to work on myself.
Mhm.
Is that always a perfect system? No. And, but the same thing could be argued for, there are a lot of drawbacks to, let's say, an initiatory process.
Mhm.
So you kind of have to know yourself to know which vibe is going to work best for you. Now, that being said, I think that the people who have kind of studied it, like especially when it came to that deal with the numbers and the calls versus the servient angels, that was something that I don't think anybody had done before. So I published the article, and then I posted on my website. And then, if people find that interesting or compelling, great. If they don't get it, I added like this companion video to it. But I know that there are other people who are doing their own thing. And if I happen to find something that I'm looking for, it's great having somebody else who's also like somewhat independent, or at least willing to publish about that. So I guess to answer your question more straightforwardly, instead of going on this tangent and then finding a tangent to the tangent,
No worries.
is that I find that the people who kind of know it are appreciating that I'm trying to both make it accessible, but also understand that I'm being upfront about where I'm, with my practice in a way that sort of demystifies it a little bit. And I don't hang out as much, not that I have anything against them, but just for the complicated reasons of Facebook being Facebook, I've decided not to be in those groups. But I'm more than willing to like talk shop if somebody reaches out with this, that, or the other thing. And I found a lot of people who reach out to me through my website who will say, hey, did you know about this? And I say, no, I didn't know about that. Let me look into that, blah, 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 blah. And so I kind of wish it were easier in a lot of ways, but this is the problem with having a niche interest, right? Is like,
Absolutely.
you hope to find somebody, but
Yeah, absolutely. Like there might be like 10 other people that are kind of like into doing what you're into doing as much as you are. Are they
Yes.
going to be chill human beings to hang around with? Are
Yes.
they going to
Yes.
speak the same language as you? You're right, like all kinds of
Yeah.
things there.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, you're into Risk. Well, I'm into Axis and Allies, but we think each other is cool. So we'll hang out in the same group. So that's what I found,
Mm.
with Green Mushroom and all of the other Discords that I'm a part of. So it's just, I'm looking for cool people, and eventually you realize like, that's it's sort of a friend and somebody who you want to be in contact with over the long term is different from somebody who necessarily shares your narrow interest. And that's kind of a good thing, like viva la difference,
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, every relationship is its own unique and
Yeah,
beautiful beast, I suppose. So
yeah,
yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me tonight. Is there anything that we haven't gotten into that you wanted to mention?
No, I think we'll see what happens next. I'm not sure how long the angels will have use of me, and I'll just keep on asking them for help. But I think the best thing that I've discovered is, how much they've gotten me in touch with my own heart. So I continue to be very grateful to the angels for all that they've done for me, and continue to do for me in ways that I'm aware of, and many ways that I'm not. So. Yeah, that's about it. And I feel like they've definitely helped grow and mature me in a lot of ways that I didn't know I needed. So,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, do you have any questions that you would like to ask me?
Yeah, how's it going? What's the latest in the magical work that you're into? Maybe talk a little bit about the green mushroom. What's next? What's up?
Oh, yeah, gosh. Well, let's see. What's next for the green mushroom? I have been working with associate of mine, I guess, somebody that I know, who is in this field on putting together a trauma-informed practices workshop for
Mm,
magicians. So we can kind of like
yes,
look at what that might look like,
very
recognizing
needed.
those things. I think so too, recognizing those things within ourselves, within each other, and kind of, yeah, giving ourselves tools to maybe have more functionality in that regard and stuff. And also just education about it. I think it's a really interesting topic, and yeah, there's a lot there. The consent stuff is huge. We're continuing to investigate the magical intersections of consent and the will and the sort of alchemical properties of consent. I think a good touchstone here is to sort of think about how different of an experience it is to go to church because like you're super into what's being taught there. Like you want to hear about the good Lord today and you're going there, you're
Mm,
so excited versus like being dragged there as a kid who doesn't like it and who's creeped out by it and doesn't, like it's a completely different experience. And the line that divides these things is really consent. So just that kind of property and what does that mean in like a sort of magical sense is something that's really interesting to investigate. I have been trying to become more disciplined about putting my words down on paper and then also sharing them, trying to do a lot more writing and trying to get this. So yeah, I've been focusing a lot on those things and yeah, just kind of trying to keep it chill, keep just trying to stay chill. I'm learning how to sing still. I'm working on that and that's been really fun and interesting and yeah, lots of stuff.
that's really good. Yeah, and all of these things are the common theme, I would say, to all of them is about learning how to be authentic and helping other people to be authentic too. And that's a very cool mutual journey that is going on. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And
Yeah, I appreciate what you're doing too. And I appreciate the times that you've shared the work that you're doing with me and others through like, allowing us to experience these calls and stuff. I got a lot of value from that. And yeah, I just really appreciate you making that available to us.
sure, sure. Yeah, and so that sounds really exciting. And I think one of the things too is that when it comes to magic, realizing how, like it or not, we are all kind of like in each other's spaces,
Mm.
and we're trying to navigate kind of this very collective, shared, semi-permeable space between each other. There's a lot to that. So I think that there's this story that I had about, or I heard about this like martial artist who was just like up against like a black belt, and the thing that they talked about was how the black belt was doing the exact same moves that they had learned as a beginner, but they were just doing them so well and it was so practiced that made the difference in the edge. And so I think that when it comes to foundational stuff like, oh, I'm a human being and I'm coming at this magical practice that's going to open up a whole lot of stuff. I need to be okay with the trauma that has happened, or maybe not okay, but at least in a better space with it. Maybe I should work on that. And that even though it seems like, duh, that's fundamental, it's something that is very easy, even, it's easy to overlook or think you've got it down. Whereas if you keep on practicing it, and I know I'm kind of going off on this tangent here, but like, I've been in therapy for like the last 7 years, and there's still stuff additional that like I say, when you're getting to that subtle thing, you're still doing the same work. It's just that all of a sudden you discover this landmine and you need to just do the exact same work around it. And it gets frustrating because you're like, where's the end? Where's the end? It's like, that's what life is.
Mm-hmm.
Life is that there's a lot of stuff in there that you think you have figured out and maybe you don't. Or it's not so much that you resolve something, but that it gets resolved for you. And, that's just, but you have to take it head on, so I really appreciate all of that work. I think that's important for your listeners to understand, is that it sounds like, yeah, I got that, but it's not.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I was just talking about this with somebody today about like, how it seems like sometimes something will be completely resolved and then all of a sudden something will come up and you're like, oh, wow, there was a whole other layer there. And that was just the tip of the iceberg that was resolved. And now, but that's okay, right? It's an endless process of discovery. And every time we confront one of these challenges, we give ourselves new tools for the future and dealing with things better and better. So, that's the attitude I try to hold on to.
Yeah, yeah. And getting comfortable with it, right? Let's get comfortable with the fact that we're not completely, that we don't have anything. Otherwise, why would we even do magic?
Sure, exactly. Right? Also being comfortable with the idea of knowing that you will make mistakes and being willing to admit that and correct them or work on correcting them and not. I have this little sticky note in front of me that it says, aiming for perfection is aiming for failure. And I think that's a good.
I love that.
Keep in mind, because I do have, this is obviously something I need to remind myself of when I'm like, writing scripts for my podcast or doing other things like that, because things will never get done if aiming for perfection is the goal. Right. So yes.
What's that old Russian proverb? The perfect and the good are enemies. And
Absolutely.
Then you realize there's only one side that's ever gonna win. So you just aim for good enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep going. Which is not to say aim for like mediocre, but is it good? Is it good enough?
Yeah, aim for good enough for you to feel proud about or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh yeah. Well, Cliff, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate it. Where can listeners find your work?
Sure. If you are interested in my Enochian work, you can go to enochian.today. And if you're interested in my astrological stuff, you can reach me at yourlightbridge.com. I'm going to do a rebrand at some point next year, but for now, if you're interested in astrology or anything like that, contact me through that. But yeah, generally, I do tend to respond to emails relatively quickly. So any question you have, just let me know or whatever, and reach out, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions or to listen to your experiences or share some of my own if you're curious about that. And I will do whatever. I mean, reach out, chat, I'll answer.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks so much to Cliff for joining me. Always a cool time hanging out. You will find links in the show description and notes to Enochian Today and yourlightbridge.com. If you enjoyed our chat, you can hear Cliff and I talk about his work in episode 20, Enochian Magic, and episode 36, Enochian Astrology and Math Magics, with Cliff from Enochian Today and Winter Solstice Sound Sigil Iteration 2. If Math Magics sounds like fun to you, don't forget to check out episode 54, Cryptology, Ciphers, and Other Math Magics with Reverend Eric from Arnemancy, and Embracing the Others with All in All, which was last year's holiday show. We're going to be getting into a bit of listener mail and shoutouts in just a second here, but first let me be diligent in reminding you that if you like the show and you like what we've got going on over here, you can support it on Patreon, which will entitle you to receive a bibliomancy reading from me. Making this show is, of course, a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one intrepid podcaster, but it means a lot to me to be able to do it. Thank you so much to the people who are making this show possible by giving on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, and to the people who are supporting the show and spreading the word. Tell all of your friends, allies, and magical associates about it, as well as everybody you meet at your holiday parties. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review where that's possible. Both of these things are super helpful, so thank you so much to everybody who is already doing that stuff. And yes, don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of that follow button so you can get updates when new episodes come out. Alright, let's do listener mail and shoutouts. Shout out and much love to all the Pocket Wizards and Mushrotters. I had such a cool time hanging out for our winter solstice gift ceremony. Thanks to everybody who made it out for that, and for all of the generosity of spirit that you and others in the community have when it comes to sharing magical thoughts and the like. I continue to learn from all of you every day, and I really value the little spaces and corners and nooks and crannies that we're building. So fuck yeah, keep kicking ass. Gratitude, and here is to another awesome year, hopefully. We'll see how it goes. Shout out to Chelsea and Travis at 12 Talons and everybody who signed up for Tarot and Brews. I'm so excited to share some of what the Tarot system and the story of the major arcana has taught me, and the process of building out the class has been a really cool opportunity to reflect back on that and find some new depth in it. Tarot and other types of tools like it can be such powerful vehicles for self-reclamation and empowerment and introspection and the rest of it, so I'm so stoked to not only offer the perspectives that I have, and to share my decades of experience with the cards, but also to learn from my co-teacher and from those in attendance. So fuck yeah, cheers. Shout out to everybody who has reached out with kind words about the show and to let me know that it's been helpful on your magical journey. When I started making the thing, I had the idea that if it were able to help just one person, then all of the hard work would be worth it. And I think it has, and it definitely is worth it, so fuck yeah. Shout out to Flame Clown, who lives on and burns strong. Solidarity to everybody out there finding their own path rather than having someone or some book tell you which way to walk with your magic. Whether or not it was featured, know that all the missives I received are appreciated. I'm incredibly lucky to have such rad listeners. Keep kicking ass out there. Much gratitude to everybody who's been supporting the show by rating, reviewing, and giving on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. Fuck yeah, thank you so much. If you'd like to send me thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, etc., you can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com. Find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod, or on Blue Sky Social at luxastrata, LUXASTRATA. Quick programming note, there's going to be a special bonus episode of the show made in conjunction with XV Planus hitting the digital airwaves very soon. This is going to feature Alan Greenfield to talk about his new book, Secrets of the Real Black Lodge Revealed. It's a pretty wild ride down several rabbit holes, which I think that those who are into unpacking layered meanings in things will enjoy. It's probably not for the faint of heart. It's very long and we get into several tangents, but there's a lot of topics of interest that we touch on, such as the TV series Twin Peaks, UFOs or UAPs or whatever we're calling them these days, and what the government might or might not know. What is the nature of the phenomenon? And what does Alan mean when he says the real Black Lodge, which is a concept that comes up in Twin Peaks and elsewhere? We're going to get into that. I'm releasing it as a bonus because it's, as I said, a little bit of like a wander down several rabbit holes and a little bit of a departure from what we typically cover here on this show. I was actually asked to be a guest host on XV Planus podcast to help interview Alan, and it was going to appear over there, but there was some things that came up and the interview fell on me to conduct, and so I put on my tinfoil hat and accessed all of my deep knowledge about all this nerdy bullshit, which I'm super into, and I think that Alan and I had a really interesting conversation. I think I managed to get a couple of straight answers out of him and everything, too. I'm releasing the episode during the time I mentioned to commemorate the Rendlesham Forest incident back in 1980. Those familiar with UFO lore will know about this, but basically a series of reported sightings of unexplained lights near Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England were seen, which became an important part of modern UFO mythology or lore or whatever word you'd like to use to describe that set of stories. I also produced a sound magic track about the Rendlesham event, which includes some work from Flood from XV Planus. It's called Eyes of Your Eyes. You might have heard it. I'm going to play that as part of the bonus episode and talk a little bit more about my thoughts in creating it. So be on the lookout for this beast soon. It will be wandering into your pod-catching apps and YouTube within the next couple of days as this is going out. Also coming your way in the new year is a great conversation I had with Tom Banger, in which we look back at his time with Temple of Psychic Youth. There's a great chat with Harold Roth about his new book, Forbidden Knowledge of the Book of Enoch, which is what Enochian magic is named for, the biblical character Enoch, who became the scribe for God in the story. There's also a rad conversation with Paul Wilde about Jim Morrison's life and the esoteric stuff going on there. A conversation with my brother about J.R. Tolkien, and much more cool stuff coming your way in 2025. Reflecting back on 2024, this year has posed some unique and interesting challenges for me and for others, I'm sure, as well. There are some things that happened that have tested my mettle in some serious ways and allowed me to figure out what I was really made of, and I'm grateful for that. It is the work of the alchemist to take whatever shit life throws at us and find a way to turn it into the gold that we need for ourselves. Whatever it means for you and your life and your practice, let me remind you to resist with the Green Mushroom Project statement of resistance. Resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Cliff for joining me. Check out the show notes for links to Enochian Today and YourLightBridge.com. Thanks so much for all of the kind words and support for the show and my other work. I really appreciate all of the help from both seen and unseen sources. Gratitude, Void, Hail Hecate. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. This is Lux Estrada, reminding you to stay strong and stay fucking curious. Alright, I'm going to leave you with another track from the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society's holiday album. Here's the Carol of the Old Ones. From everyone here at Lux Occult Podcast, myself and Team Unseen, happy holidays.
Look to the sky, way up on high, there in the night, stars on a right, beyond the past, now then at last, prison walls break, old ones awake, they will return, mankind will learn new kinds of fear, when they are here, they will reclaim, all in their name, hopes turn to black, when they come back, ignorant fools, mankind are rules, where they will pick, it's this against stars, perfectly boiling and chilling mood, a returning season of doom, scary, 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 scary solstice, very, very, very scary solstice, up from the sea, from underground, down from the sky, they're all around, they will return, mankind will learn new kinds of fear when they are here. Look to the sky, way up on high, there in the night, stars on our right, beyond the past, now then at last, prison walls break, old ones awake, madness will reign, terror and pain, woes without end, where they extend, ignorant fools, mankind are rules, where they will bend, us against stars, perfectly boiling and chilling mood, a returning season of doomsday, scary, scary, scary solstice, very, very, very scary solstice, up from the sea, from underground, all the stars, they're all around,
Stars now are right.
they will return.
Want to get an important message across but having trouble finding the right words? Wish your gift could express that special sentiment you feel for your partner, friend, coworker, family member, pet psychic, crossing guard, meth dealer, or boss? Now there's a way that your special message can go directly to your gift recipient without them even realizing it. Introducing Sublimitext, the gift card service that works on the subconscious level to let that special someone know exactly what they mean to you. For a flat fee of just $6.66, the Sublimitext service can be added to any Illumin Select gift order and delivered right to the recipient's door. Also available in audio form. Sublimitext is so seamlessly integrated into the consciousness of the recipient, I bet you didn't even realize that we